All right. Oh, great. Way to open the voice cracks the moment we start. We're off to a wonderful start here. Welcome everyone to the channel. Eric's back. How you doing today, Eric?
I'm doing good. So I'm sorry you hit puberty right as the stream started.
Sure.
Is that beard real? Is that beard real or is that a fake?
There's too much super glue. I'd take it off to show you, but it's so much super glue I can't get it on. But it's good to see you've changed your name to Dishonest Mythologist, as we all know that you are.
I am a dishonest mythologist. I do mythologetics, which is the most dishonest apologetics out there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're terrible. We're the worst.
I am just apologist in denial because there's so much evidence from before Christian texts that Dionysus turned water into wine, and I just am in denial about it. Don't you know? You see? Look how he's in denial.
You're obviously just really emotionally attached to your Christianity, and you're not knocked over by the sheer tons of evidence that's just totally against your view, and so there must be something wrong in your brain.
Yeah, so that's the psychoanalyzing is the only explanation that we get for this. So that must be what's going on here. So
yeah,
for those who don't know, back in March, I got invited to speak at a conference. And one of the topics they wanted me to cover was debunking like Jesus mythicism and pagan parallels. Well, Derek at Mythvision saw that and he got really upset with one sentence. So he did a 2-hour response to that one sentence to show that I was wrong completely. And that one sentence is that I point out that we have no pre-Christian texts that mention Dionysus turning water into wine. And he claims he has found some. We're going to evaluate them.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to go through this response. We're not going to play it all because a lot of it is him just sharing his testimony and his call to atheism and to reject Christianity, you know, the evangelical style. But when I did go to Derek's video, I was a little disappointed and rather a little annoyed because the lecture is not linked anywhere, not a pinned comment. I'm like, dude,
bro.
Yeah, what? You don't want your audience to see what I was saying? Because there's a lot more context in that, which is important. It needs to be covered, which I will bring up some of the points I made here because, yeah, there's a lot of points to bring up with regards to that. Did you watch Derek's video yet or not?
I was thinking about it, and I think on purpose, I was like, I'm just going to live genuine react. By the time I had the time to do it, I was working and all this other stuff. So normally I am Mr. Prepare. This time I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy the show.
You're gonna love it. We're gonna be destroyed. We're gonna be destroyed. I'm telling you.
See, this is the power of the Mythvision. I honestly, Derek, if you're out there, I like the guy personally. Like we get along.
Yeah,
we're kind of like frenemies, I guess. And so good guy, bad arguments. So yeah,
I completely agree. He's a nice guy. Got to the end of this video and was like, that's it. Like, first of all, I knew about these texts because I've read JP Holding, who has brought them up. Wasn't convinced when I read them then and not convinced now, and we're going to cover that. So, but I do want to so let me get to the super chat really quickly, and then I want to put up slides first before. So I think your video in post-mill is quite convincing. My one question is, how does that fit with the passages that say Jesus will come like a thief in the night? It seems like post-mill won't be surprised. So I'd have to look at them specifically. I think those are fine. I don't see how they'd be against post-mill, because we don't know the exact hour, day, year, month when Jesus is going to come, regardless of how fast the gospel spreads. Because the post-mill does not say when the last person becomes Christian, Jesus will show up that very minute. Even like Kenneth Gentry notes that, like, it doesn't have to require literally everyone on earth is a Christian. It could be just 90 or 95% Christian. It's been just totally gone as far as it possibly could and is really taken over everything as best as it can. So yeah, I think those are still compatible. I don't see why it is, but check out Kenneth Gentry's book. He Shall Have Dominion, I believe, is the title for that. Are you post-mill or are you wrong?
I'm pan mill. However it pans out, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
I
need to clarify, you know.
I'm not. I don't think I'm pre, and I'm not so sure. I'm attracted to some of the aspects of post. I'm not a big eschatology person. I just live ready. You know,
just say you're wrong. It's okay. You're stop being a dishonest mythologist, Eric.
That's right. I'm Isle of the evidence to prove.
So back in March, I gave this talk. Here are my slides from that. Okay. This is important stuff here, so that I want to cover beforehand. So one of the points I made is that, look, if you want to show that Jesus is a copy of pagan deities, there are steps that you need to do. And this is not me like moving the goalpost. This would flow from basic philosophy, basic historical methodology. So you first need to show there are correlations. Then you need to show they're not just hasty generalizations. Okay, so actually specific. So to give an example, when we look at like Noah in the flood account, and we see the flood accounts in other Mesopotamian literature, we go, oh, okay, there's definitely some similarities that are very specific here that are far more than hasty generalizations. There's probably some literary connection. Then you need to show the correlations predate Christianity. So you need to show they're specific. It can't be like, oh, Dionysus did miracles associated with wine, the most common drink in the ancient world. So you need to do that, and you need to show they're pre-Christian, because the Christians can't copy text that came later. And you also need to show a causal link. So if you don't have anything where there's like direct quotations, like with the Gilgamesh account and the flood account, it's hard to show there's a direct connection if you don't actually have him saying anything. So we know, for example, the New Testament quotes and uses the Old Testament. Why? Because they say we're citing the scriptures. We're referring to the Torah of Moses and what the prophets taught. So we can show a causal link there. Okay. And then, now Derek doesn't believe Jesus was a total myth, but he thinks a lot of the stories about Jesus are legendary. So then he would need to show that they are actually legendary. And that's an important step, because even if you can fulfill steps 1 to 4, you still can't get step 5, because, and I point this out in the end of the talk, which Derek didn't link, we see real life events commonly linked to mythology. Like, look at how they took JFK and said, well, it's like just like Camelot. Okay. We do this today with saying things like he's got a Midas touch, or she's a modern day Robin Hood, or a modern day Sherlock Holmes. Okay. We know, for example, that Robert Price goes through the Gospels and shows how they're drawing from various Old Testament texts. But contra Price, that doesn't mean that they just went through the Old Testament and said, all right, let's take this one, and let's take this one, and let's take this one. It's far more likely they had a life and a story of Jesus in front of them, and they said, you know what that reminds me of? Exodus 18.
Right.
Oh, you know what that reminds me of? Jonah 1. Because there's no pattern here other than the life of Jesus. They're just drawing incredibly randomly from the Old Testament. And we know ancient authors did this. Like Rhiannon Nash says Tacitus embodied such points in the very language which he used. And he uses linguistic echoes and structural similarities. Jan Bremer and Nicholas Horsfall note Virgil borrowed from Roman legends to paint the current event of his days. Bruce Molina and Richard Rohrbaugh say to be able to quote the tradition from memory, to apply it in creative or appropriate ways, not only brings honor to the speaker, but lends authority to his words as well. Luke 1 is an example. It is stitched together from phrases of Psalms 41, 111, 132, 105, 106, Micah 7. The ability to create out such a mosaic implied extensive, detailed knowledge of the tradition and brought great honor to the speaker able to pull it off. So the important point here is that, like, even if, like, Derek is right and they are like, the gospel authors are so, like, influenced by Dionysus, that doesn't mean anything Jesus did is a myth. They could just be like, Jesus turned water into wine. We should parallel that to a Dionysus account to show how much better he was. None of that would mean this is a myth. So going back to my point that, like, even if you can get steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, you still don't actually get step 5. In this case, showing Jesus is legendary. Okay. But I would argue that even when it comes to the example we're going to go over today, they don't predate Christianity. There is no causal link. And the specifics, there are no real specifics. So really you only get like step 1. I'll just grant that. It doesn't work though. So I think this is an important point, that the hours of arguing for these mythic parallels with Jesus ultimately lead to nothing, because even if they're right, so what? We know that the ancient authors love to write about current events and parallel them to past events or mythology. That was just common, and we still do it today. So it's a pointless endeavor at the end of the day.
Right. At best, you're not really getting anywhere. You're just kind of pointing something out that doesn't really connect to anything. It doesn't give you like a, not to sound too nerdy, but it's not going to give you a top heavy base factor of any sort of anything. It's just like, oh, wow. Whatever. I mean, again, what is Jesus supposed to do with like water, not turn water into wine if he's at a wedding? Well, you could see his disciples kind of being like, yo, Jesus, Dionysus, he kind of trademarked that first, buddy. So can you do something else? Like maybe turn this water into like Baja Blast Mountain Dew or something? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also the case that if Jesus wanted to show he was divine, that he was the real deal, he's going to do things that people would recognize as divine.
That would top the pagans.
Top the pagans that are only a myth. This is Nathan Nadeau's point. Right. That we've seen some of the atheists even cite, like this we would expect this. So, but when it comes to the case of turning water into wine, I still have some issues there we're going to get into. I don't think we have any pre-Christian texts.
Right.
Let's get to some super chats here and then we'll dive in. I know you're a high church guy, but I see a lot of pushback from people attending non-denominational churches. I attend one and I'm confused now. Listen, I'm a high church guy. I don't have any problem with that. I just don't, I prefer to be at a high church. Okay. I don't think if you attend a non-denom church, you're not Christian. I just prefer the liturgy. I like the sacredness of it. I prefer to be in that environment. But if you're thriving in a non-denom church, go for it. I don't think you have to sit in the proper pew to be a Christian. I don't think that's how it works. I'm very ecumenical. Everyone is saved except those dirty Pentecostals.
Hey, watch it there, buddy.
Which kind? Just stop being a dishonest McPologist.
That's right. I think I might be the only Pentecostal McPologist, though. So most of them are very Anglican or High Church Baptist or something like that. Actually, you probably have more affinity with some of their church background than mine, for sure. Yeah. So yeah.
Shameless plug for God Loves Mormons channel. Okay, great. Go check that channel out, everyone.
I will say their video on the Book of Abraham and how it's like a big fraud. That was extremely good video. Just to say,
yeah, I'll check it out. It looks interesting.
I'll plug it. It was good.
All right. Yeah, I've not seen any of their stuff, so you've heard it here, folks. Eric plugs it, but he's a dishonest McPologist. So can you really trust him?
That's right.
GBU praise Jesus Christ. Thank you. And he also says, hit that like button. Yes, hit that like button. I might leave that up for a little while so you all remember to hit that like button. I'll wait.
Where's the likes, people?
I said
bring those likes up.
Better. We're not going to go on until you like it.
Did he specifically requested it?
Excellent. All right, let's get into this. As with always, we cannot just sit here and play the whole thing. We will go through it and hit some time markers here of Derek's attempt to show why he is no longer a Christian apologist and evidence that Dionysus turned water into wine. Also, I have linked my actual lecture below this stream, since it's not linked below Derek's video, so you can go watch that. The only mistake I will say I made in that is I said that Dionysus turning water into wine comes from a 3rd century text. It's actually a 3rd century manuscript, but the text, I believe, is 2nd century. All right, let's play this first section here.
Now, I know this all seems a bit like a conspiracy theory on steroids.
Yes.
If I were to walk into any college today where experts in New Testament studies is taught, they would have probably thought this was nuts. I honestly didn't understand why this was thought to be so ridiculous, when many of these experts themselves thought a dead man literally came back to life in 3 days. Who's ridiculous?
So it's kind of an interesting admission there, that there are more people willing to believe that Jesus rose from the dead than take this view. Now, none of this means Derek is wrong. Consensus is a tool. It's not a hammer to hit people over the head with. I think Joel Koretko said something like that. So yeah, but I mean, like, this is just an interesting admission here that, like, this is not supported by academia. And listen, when you and I have taken non-consensus views, we got to roll our sleeves up, do the hard work, and show our position from the evidence. Derek's got to do that too here.
Yeah, I mean, I am the dishonest mycologist, so I don't have a problem, like, bumping up against consensus and pointing out where there's some flaws in their logic, their reasoning, the whole way they do history and their epistemology. And so I'm willing to do that. From what I've seen in some of my conversations with Derek on these topics before, I think you and I both agree that it's an even bigger epistemological mess than even what we see some of the, I don't know, bad habits of some biblical scholars.
Well, you bring up a good point. You bring up epistemology. And a lot of the problems we're going to have with what Derek argues for here are going to be because of philosophical problems. Now, in a conversation from about a year ago, he was having with Jay Dyer, Derek said he's just not big into philosophy. Fair enough. The problem is that when you start making philosophical inferences, like he does, you need to understand the basic philosophy behind there, because if you understood the philosophy, I think you could avoid some of the issues we're going to bring up here later in this stream.
You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to at least have some background and understanding on how, the reasoning inference to the best explanation, maybe a little understanding of how Bayes' theorem works and a lot of these other things. And it doesn't take tons of philosophy classes. I'm not a heavy into philosophy necessarily either. I prefer the history, the data, the text, and all that other stuff. But I'd at least try to have an understanding of how some of this stuff works. So I'm not saying Derek hasn't tried to, but I just, from what we see, it's messy.
Yeah, one of my chief arguments will be from philosophical methodology against this whole position here, and I think that's important to bring up. But let me play the next section here.
When we get defensive of things we hold in a very special place in our hearts, we're even willing to lie, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
Here we go.
We will practically do anything to defend our cause. The analogy I would give is, if someone went on attack with my family in some way, you can bank on me getting protective, whether the attack was true or false. Apologists have built a public reputation of being beacons of light in a dark world of falsehood, where they not only represent themselves, but also represent Christ. They cannot allow defeat. I know this firsthand. So turning to the words of Michael Jones.
So sometimes they'll bring up Dionysus and they'll say Dionysus turned water into wine. Yeah, that comes from a 3rd century text. Post-dates the New Testament. Shut up.
Is this true?
Just so we know, that's the one sentence this 2-hour documentary is trying to respond to. One sentence it takes 2 hours to respond to it. Let me play this section out.
That's a tweet. That's a tweet.
It's like, calm down, bro. Calm down.
Should we just shut our damn mouths? To be blunt, It is Michael who should be shutting his mouth.
Oh,
I cannot help but dig at Michael.
Not gonna.
Because his ignorance is contagious.
Yep, I'm ignorant now, apparently.
And this video popped off and got much attention that I know many who are sheep in his audience just eat up what he says as though he has completely debunked the myth view.
Okay, so he just called all of you sheep.
Yeah.
That's what he thinks of you. That's a pretty low blow, dude. Honestly, come on. Are you really?
Yeah.
That's what you think of Christians that don't agree with you? We're sheep?
Well, apparently whoever just mindlessly follows your channel and just thinks that you're like speaking from ex cathedra, you're the Pope of apologetics or something. But yeah, no, yeah, that's pretty harsh. It's not usually the way you want to kind of start a conversation with somebody is like, hey, you sheep, stop listening to Michael Jones and he needs to shut his mouth. It's like, let's just talk about the evidence. Let's stick to the evidence. You know, we don't need to insult people. It seems kind of like a good idea. I understand where he's coming from to some extent. I mean, I spent an hour the other day talking to some Dawa Muslim people, and it's like no matter what I said, it was just like they were very defensive. They were very touchy. Their defensives went up, and that's fine. But yes, we know that having a defense attorney mentality is a bad thing, that you're just going to defend your belief, damn the evidence, no matter what comes, I'm just going to truck ahead, you know, and just defend, no matter what the evidence says. But you and I, Michael, we don't have to be Christians. It's like, it's not like if the evidence were to come that like showed that like, hey, there's some serious flaws and problems and different things with your argument, then we need to at least believe that there are a lot of people out there that are willing to change their mind when presented with evidence. And there are people who have more of a scout mentality who are just willing to follow things as they are. And it's just really insulting because there's a lot of scholars and people who you cite, people who you quote all the time that aren't stupid. And you're just basically kind of accusing those people as sheep, even though they're just as educated as the scholars that he would have on his channel. And so it's just a bit odd. It's just like, hey, like, I don't know. Anyway, I can go on and on about it, but.
Yep. All right. Let me continue on here.
Like me 10 years ago, sipping whatever William Lane Craig and others gave me to drink, the audience listening to Jones want it to be true.
Post-dates the New Testament. Shut up.
They don't want to find out that their sacred tradition is deeply indebted to other gods or non-Jewish sources. As a prophet, I can predict that my evidence will get dismissed by Jones and other apologists in some clever way. But truth be told, Dionysus, the god of revelry, celebration, life, and wine, has performed countless wine miracles long before Jesus ever shows up.
Yeah. No one has ever said Dionysus never did wine miracles before Jesus. I don't think I've ever made that claim. I don't think Eric has ever made that claim. I don't think any other apologist, if any apologist made that claim, then they're wrong. I don't think we've ever denied that Dionysus, the god of wine, did wine miracles. That's not the problem. The problem is you got to show that it's specifically the miracle Jesus did, turning water into wine. That's where we're going to have a problem when we get to that.
Yeah. It's all just, yeah, it's pretty crazy how emotionally charged that whole introduction was to the based Giga Chad Dionysus, who's just going to crush the body of Christ with his obvious pagan parallels and everything else that's coming up here. So,
well, I mean, the other thing that bothers me about this section, and I don't think it's intentional on Derek's part, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but he's really priming his audience to reject anything we say, even though he said earlier in this that we should be open-minded. But then he said, look, guys, just be open-minded to the evidence. But by the way, these dishonest apologists and their sheep of an audience just want to believe. So they're going to come up with these lame excuses to dismiss this. So, but, be open-minded. Except when they're around, we need to make sure you're primed to think that they're really just evil or retarded or something like that. He has no problem telling his audience to be closed-minded when listening to us, but other places be open-minded. Which is it? Come on. This is why this documentary is so long. There's so much fluff like that, which is not only dishonest, Derek, it is downright rude to me and my audience. You want us to, you say we're equals, but then you do crap like this. Come on. Are you really treating us like we're on the same playing field?
Wake up, sheeple.
Sheeple?
Yeah.
I honestly was watching that going, is that the next line that's going to happen?
Sounds like a conspiracy theory. Okay. So
yeah, listen, I don't think Derek is doing that intentional.
No, okay? I don't think he is. I think he's come through maybe a background and he's got baggage, and I don't know the whole gist of his story. I know some of it. But that's neither here nor there. It's like what matters is the conclusion and how we've taken the logical steps to arrive to them, not the emotional steps. I could be emotionally, I could believe in Christianity because I had a fortune cookie, with the scripture verse on it, and it's like, oh wow, how did and something happened that was true in the fortune cookie. I don't know, that's a stupid example that I just came up with, but that would be a crappy reason to be a Christian, but that wouldn't make it false by itself. Like, you need to just let's just take the steps and not prime our audiences and just poison the well at the beginning.
Yeah. So I want to play some random sections of Derek's video coming up to kind of make one of my points about general parallels before we get into the meat and bones that's going to come later. But I do think this stuff is important to hit at our point here. So let me play a couple sections here.
Gamaliel advises caution, suggesting that if God is truly behind the apostles' mission, no amount of human resistance will succeed. It's worth noting, too, in the Iliad, Euripides, and Sophocles, the cult, the group of the god of Dionysus and his followers, are persecuted. This is exactly the trend we find in the New Testament.
Are you kidding me? People are persecuted? That's exactly the same thing? No, that's generally the same thing. Many groups were persecuted.
Therefore invented.
I mean, like, get the logical leap.
What? Oh no, like that. Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna argue against Luke, then this would be my advice to atheists or whatever. Like, do it the old-fashioned Bart Ehrman way and just say, like, Luke has some sloppiness and he contradicts himself at points, and he makes historical blunders here and there, which I don't think any of those things are true. But like, like actually argue against the historicity of Luke, not just there's persecution, therefore this must be obvious copying from other myths. It's just like, I mean, I hope that's just one tiny part, the tiniest of tiny parts in a cumulative case. But even then, it's so weak that it's not worth bringing up.
Yeah, it's like saying Confucius had disciples, Socrates had disciples. This is exactly the same thing. It'd be like, yeah, teachers tend to have disciples. That doesn't mean there's an actual causal link here. There's got to be more going on. But here's another example.
And bringing joy and life to all who follow him. Dionysus is more than just the god of wine. He is a force of transformation, vitality, and communal ecstasy. This transformation power later becomes pneumatic or spiritual transformation. His worshippers experienced this when they were filled by his spirit through communion with the deity, just like Jesus later possesses his followers by the Spirit.
Okay. Having some form of ecstasy or possessed by the Spirit, again, very common in any religious tradition. I don't know of any religious tradition that wouldn't have something like that.
Well, I guess the Sufis were just copying from Dionysus, because
absolutely
they ecstasy
and
definitely the Pentecostals are really high on Dionysus. Can confirm. So.
Jewish mythicists involved in the Kabbalah. There's one. The Ahmadis as well. I mean, the Sikhs, we could just do that as well. I mean, it's just everyone must be copying that. Come on, these guys. This is what I mean about these being too general. This just doesn't work. Let me. I got one more here I want to play, and then we'll. It's right, basically the same thing here. So, yeah, here we go.
But it gets better. In Euripides' Bacchae, written around 405 BCE, that's the 5th century BCE, a Maenad struck the ground with her thyrsus, and the god at that spot put forth a fountain of wine. Then they crowned their hair with leaves, ivy and oak, and flowering bryony. One woman struck her thyrsus against a rock, and a fountain of cool water came bubbling up. Another drove her fennel in the ground, and where it struck the earth, at the touch of God, a spring of wine poured out. Those who wanted milk scratched at the soil with bare fingers, and the white milk came welling up. Here Dionysus produces water, wine, and milk from the earth, just as Yahweh was said to bless the land of Canaan with flowing milk and honey. Yeah, I know. Apologist. It's not water into wine. Don't go anywhere, because we will get there.
Oh, we will for sure, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Again, this is way too general of a connection. I did a video a year ago in response to someone called Bullet Holes in the Bible.
Yeah.
Did the Bible copy the Bacchae? And I covered these texts in there, and I like it's this again. These are just way too general. No one denies Dionysus, a god, is going to do miracles, especially miracles associated with wine. Okay, to make a connection, you got to do something like we do with Gilgamesh in the Genesis flood account. The parallels there are too exact to not have some sort of literary connection. I don't think one copied the other. I think they're sharing a similar oral traditions that have been handed down in both cultures, but there clearly is some literary connection. If you're going to show there's a connection between, since the New Testament doesn't say, yes, we got this story from Dionysus, you got to show something pretty exact to establish a causal link. That's not what we've seen thus far.
Yeah, it just feels like a huge leap. You know, it's just like I don't know. I'm at a loss for words right now.
I know, and like again, this is parallelomania. I mean, you could do this with anything.
I know he doesn't like the word parallelomania, you know, and it's like he'll use like parallelophobia or something like that. But it's just like, you know, I could say, well, Martin Luther borrowed from the story of Achilles in the Iliad, because just like Achilles refused to fight in the Iliad, and he explained that his honor had been insulted by Agamemnon, and he believed it was a duty to defend his honor by fighting, Luther was like, hey, well, here I stand. I could do no other, you know. And he could call the Pope the you know, all these nasty names and all this other stuff. It is just like, again, it's like if that's so general and so vague, to make a causal link out of it is just mind-boggling.
What is the name of that scholar? I forget. Hold on. Let me just thought of this. Oh yeah, Jeffrey Tripp. I remember Jeffrey Tripp was on Mythvision one time, and one of the things he noted was like the ancient people didn't have a lot of like beverages. They had water, milk, wine. You know, like when you don't have a lot of beverages, you're going to talk about the beverages you do have a lot. So we're going to see a lot of texts about wine, milk, because they didn't have, as you said, Baja Blast. I mean,
yeah,
this is why anything with wine is just going to be so general. That was the common go-to drink for celebrations.
Yeah, it's not a surprising connection at all. It's like, what are they? What else are they going to talk about?
Well, in the next section, I'll get to some super chats here. We were going to get to. I'm going to let Derek go on for like 4 minutes or something explaining the Bacchae, because I think it's interesting, but I'm going to make a point. But I'll get to some super chats here before we get there. What's the best argument for God in your opinion? Eric looks like he wants to go to a Diddy party.
No, I don't.
No. All right. What's the best argument for God's existence?
My favorite argument for God's existence, just God's existence, like general theism. Probably fine tuning. Fine tuning argument. Yeah. I
like contingency arguments, especially the one I use from quantum field theory. I think it's hard to get around. Thoughts on hybrid social relational trinity views?
I like monarchical Trinitarianism.
Yeah, I mean, that's technically a social Trinitarian view. So
Yeah,
I don't know about
sure.
hybrids. I think there's a way to make the social and the Latin views work together, but I need to develop that more. Just some ideas I had. Hi, IP. Do you have some sources on Zoroastrianism and how it influenced concepts like heaven and hell? Because some scholars suggest that. Yeah, my problem is that Zoroastrian, we know from like texts of early authors talking about the Zoroastrian followers that they were monotheists. There were some interesting aspects of them, but a lot of when you get to the specifics, it's hard to really connect that because all their texts are pretty late. Like the Xenavesta is not written to, I think, like the 3rd or 4th century. And then like scholars all that focus on that, like Michael Berger, note that Zoroastrianism changed to deal with Islamic and Christian influence. So it up until about the 10th century, I believe. So like it's hard to really do that kind of thing. How do we not know some of these specific things like around heaven or hell were not influenced from the Abrahamic faiths? It's hard to, because we don't have the early text to really say that. We have Greco-Roman authors mentioning the followers, but they don't get into too many specifics, if I recall. I need to double check on that though. Hey, appreciate both of you guys' content. Do you have any resources about the objections raised around Daniel's prophecies?
Jonathan McClatchy's got a pretty good article on his blog defending the historicity of Daniel, and I think he goes into some of the prophecies. But there's a few books out there. I'm drawing a blank on their names right now. It's not something I've studied in great detail at this point. So,
no, I need to study it more. I know Rob on Sentinel Apologetics, commentary on Daniel that he goes into more details. Maybe check that out. I don't know. I'm fine with it being a late text, just have reliable traditions in it. And Benjamin Noonan's got some interesting work on the loan words in there that actually show they're pretty early. These are texts that have to be early. So it could have been compiled late, which I would be fine saying, and then it just has early, reliable traditions. Yeah. Derek is in the chat. What up, Derek? You said shut up first, guys. Are you kidding me? That warrants calling all my followers sheep and that I'm ignorant and that we're just want this to be true. That's a little bit of a stretch, but okay. I'm sorry I said shut up. The audience laughed. I kind of meant it as tongue in cheek. I thought that's how it would be taken, not as shut up, idiots. It was so sorry. I didn't think a tongue in cheek comment to be taken like that. I don't think that warrants you calling all my followers sheep. But
yeah, I don't know. I said no shut ups, but yeah, it is. I think this is. I think it could be. It's okay to be spicy, and as long as you're not like degrading and insulting somebody. And I don't think.
Listen,
has happened on our side.
I don't think Derek was doing it intentionally. I'm just saying, listen, I think these things you said did, and I said earlier, I don't think these things just came across the wrong way. If I came across the wrong way too, I apologize. As for the text I'm talking about, that's Achilles Tatius, the adventures of, what is it called? It's like Leucippe and Clitophon or something like that. I'm probably butchering the names, but I believe that's the text specifically that I was referring to. What a stupid way to think. I would and am 100% ready to give up Christianity if there's strong evidence against it. Hey, Mythvision, let's have a street fight. Inspiring ring philosophy versus Mythvision. As long as I am allowed to use kicks, because
Derek's a buff guy, so I don't know. That'd be an interesting fight. So
I as long as I can kick, because that's how I fight when I was training to be a black belt. Hey, IP, what are some good resources on a defense of free will? Check out Tim Stratton's book. I think that'd be the place to go for a layman audience. So yeah, check that out. David the Wingeling says, IP, we know you're a Mormon. I figured it out. Well, Wingeling fan, I mean, obviously it's the real David Wood. You're 100% correct. I'm a Trinitarian Mormon. There's no other. I mean, obviously those exist, right?
The text of Joseph Smith was corrupted, and he's restoring the true text.
You see?
This is the proof.
All right, let's get back into the video. All right, so this is Derek. He's going to go through the Bacchae. I'm just going to let this play out a little bit here because I think this is very interesting, and I think he does a good job of how he explains it.
John's storytelling. The story of the Bacchae unfolds as follows. Dionysus, the god of wine, appears at the beginning of the play and introduces himself in the prologue. He calls himself the son of Zeus and explains why he has come to Thebes. I have returned to Thebes, the land where I was born, and here I stand, a god in disguise, appearing as a man. We learn from his speech that Dionysus's father is Zeus, making him divine, while his mother was the mortal Semele. He has returned to Thebes because his mortal relatives are spreading rumors about his mother lying about being impregnated by the god Zeus. In effect, they were denying his divinity, just like the Jews accused of Jesus in John 8:41. We were not born of fornication. Only his grandfather, Cadmus, has honored his mother's tomb. So Dionysus decides to return home, strike his aunts with madness, and reveal himself as the son of Zeus to everyone. Dionysus's main opponent in this story is his cousin Pentheus, the king of Thebes and grandson of Cadmus. Dionysus describes Pentheus as rebelling against the divine because he refuses to worship him. When Pentheus appears on stage, he denounces Dionysian worship as obscene disorder and insults Dionysus as a charlatan magician. Pentheus even mocks his grandfather Cadmus and the prophet Tiresias for dressing in Dionysian attire to honor the god. Tiresias warns Pentheus not to mock the will of heaven, reminding him that Dionysus's gift of wine takes away the sorrows of mankind and is the true medicine for misery. He urges Pentheus to accept Dionysus, explaining that worshipping Dionysus can bring favor from the gods. Cadmus also begs Pentheus to recognize Dionysus's divinity, saying that if it's a noble fiction, it still brings honor to their family. But Pentheus refuses to listen, even ignoring the warning about a terrible punishment for defying Dionysus, like the one Actaeon suffered for blaspheming Artemis. Pentheus dismisses Tiresias and Cadmus, telling them not to spread their madness to him. Angry at his family's weakness, Pentheus orders his men to arrest the effeminate stranger, Dionysus in disguise, who has fooled the old men. Dionysus lets himself be captured and is brought before Pentheus, leading to a tense, mocking dialogue. Pentheus ultimately locks Dionysus in a dark cell within the palace. However, Pentheus has underestimated his captive. Dionysus shatters the palace with an earthquake and escapes unscathed. At this point, a messenger reports to Pentheus about the wild revelries of the women, including Pentheus's mother Agave in the mountains. Furious, Pentheus decides to attack the women with an army. Dionysus persuades him that it would be better to observe them in disguise. Convincing Pentheus to dress as a woman, once there, Dionysus tells him to climb a tall tree for a better view. But the women spot him, and in their madness tear him apart, believing he is a wild animal. Agave herself brings Pentheus's head back to Thebes, only realizing the horror of her actions once her madness fades. In the end, Dionysus punishes all who opposed him, re-establishing his divinity. When we examine the Bacchae...
All right, so that's the basic story of the Bacchae. Very interesting. And now we're about to go somewhere off in the left field.
We could see structural and thematic similarities with John's Gospel.
What? I'm sorry, what? What similarities? Beyond vague generalities. Eric, help me out. I'm confused.
Yeah, what the Sigma? Yeah, man. I'm lost.
Listen.
I'm at a loss for words here.
Listen, I remember what was it? David Litwa said, like just counting the differences as apologetics, but just counting the similarities as parallelomania. Like that's David Litwa. Listen, there are so many differences here. Jesus is never said to be in disguise in John. In fact, he makes very clear that he is the Word become flesh. Okay, he didn't strike his ants with madness. There's no cousin that's his opponent. There's no line about obscene disorder. There's no gift of wine to take away the sorrows of mankind. There's nothing about saying this that you should just accept this as a noble fiction. Jesus doesn't escape from prison with an earthquake. There's no wild women. The mother of the villain's not involved. There's no observing them in a tree in disguise and then the head being ripped off. I mean, like, there's so many differences here. Like, yeah, there are some vague similarities, which we're about to get into, but man, you really got to stretch them and you got to ignore the vast amount of differences.
That's why I'm just so dumbfounded. I'm just like, well, wait a second. Like, well, what are we doing here? Like, yeah, who's going to read that story and be like, that's just like Bacchus. John is just such a plagiarist. It's like, what?
And it'd be so hard for me to go like, what was John thinking if he was like, oh, the Bacchae, I know what I'm going to do. Like,
yeah.
And then you get the Gospel of John out of that. And it's like, listen, and again, even if that's what happened, that doesn't mean the story of Jesus is just made up. It just means he's like, Jesus did some things. I could make some connections to what Dionysus did in the Bacchae. Like, because that, again, we know ancient authors did that, but you got to do more. Like, wow.
Well, if that's the connections he was making, he made it really, really vague, and it's only seemingly mythicist centuries later that's like, yeah, wow, that they have to be literally dependent.
Yeah.
I'm baffled.
I know. All right, let's get into some of these.
But also the book of Acts. We're just going to focus on John's gospel, though, suggesting that John may have drawn on this Dionysian story. Here are some of the general parallels. 1, rejection by family.
Again, very general.
In both stories, a divine figure returns home, but is rejected by his family.
Okay, but Jesus doesn't like return home after a journey. He's with his brothers growing up, and then he becomes a preacher. And then, of course, like in Acts, like since Derek brought up Acts, James and his brothers are now believing in Jesus. So, like,
in John, Jesus came to his own, and his own did not receive him. John 1:11.
Okay, but again, as David Litwa said, just focusing on the differences is apologetics. Focusing on the similarities is parallelomania. It's not the same thing. Being rejected by the family and being rejected by the people is a difference. There is a similarity there, but it's not a very specific similarity. It's way too general.
An entire people group versus his relatives. Oh, okay.
And this just goes back to philosophy, because we know in philosophy correlation is not causation.
Yeah.
There are so many stories throughout history, you're going to find overlap at times.
While the Bacchae, Dionysus returns to Thebes and is scorned by his mortal relatives. 2, unrecognized divinity. Dionysus and Jesus both come as gods in disguise and are not recognized by those around them.
Except all of Jesus's disciples in John, and he directly proclaims he doesn't distract. In the Bacchae, Dionysus is like disguise. He's like, I don't want anyone to know I'm Dionysus until he unleashes the Maenads on Pentheus. Jesus is like, hey guys, I'm divine. His disciples are like, yep. And the religious leaders are like, no, you're not. So like, this is, again, sure, there is a vague similarity there, but the differences need to be noted as well.
Dionysus arrives in Thebes as a mysterious stranger, while Jesus is repeatedly misunderstood and rejected.
That's not the same thing.
3, wine and salvation. Dionysus brings wine as a medicine for misery to relieve human suffering, while Jesus offers a wine as his blood, promising spiritual life, as in John chapter 2, with
also not the same thing.
The water into wine miracle, and John 6 with references.
is John 6 really referencing the Eucharist? I mean, not John 6, excuse me. John 2 really referencing the Eucharist there? I mean, you could make that theological connection, I suppose, if you want to, but it's certainly not explicit in John's gospel or even like strongly implied. I don't know. It just seems like he's at a wedding. There's a situation and his mom's like, "Hey, Jesus, come on." And
the foreshadowing in there is about his death. Like he says, "My time has not come."
Yeah, I guess.
So you could maybe make that, but again, there's no bread involved. And I think that's important for the Eucharist because the bread is more important because
it's his flesh.
It's the flesh, and what flesh does not have blood in it as well is the argument that's often been made.
To his blood. 4. Failure to recognize kinship. In both stories, the central tragedy lies in the antagonist's failure to recognize a family connection with the divine figure. In the Bacchae, Pentheus doesn't see that as the grandson of Cadmus, the father of Semele, he is in a way a brother to Dionysus, the god-man. Similarly, in John, the Jewish leaders as antagonists and Jesus, the protagonist, share the same father in heaven. This makes them brothers in a spiritual sense, but unlike Jesus' unique and complete relationship with the Father, their connection remains unfulfilled.
What?
That's not the same thing. How, what is going? So let me just try to get into the psychology here. So John is like reading this Bacchae, and he's like, I'm going to change this to something completely different, so it looks nothing like what I'm copying, but everyone will know I'm copying this because it's so obvious. Like, it goes back to that clever forger idea. Like, we know the clever forger came in and did all these things, and everyone missed it because he was so clever, but he wasn't clever enough to fool us. Like, come on. Like, this is just such a stretch. There's one here I wanted to get to, but I'm just like, man, like this one, I was just like, you got to be kidding me.
So again, I'm just at a loss. It's like, why would you make these connections? And like, here's my
favorite one.
Okay.
Pentheus's mock dressed in women's clothing and ultimately was killed on a tree. That's clearly the same as Jesus's mock dressed in a robe, crowned with thorns and lifted up on a cross, Eric.
Robe,
see?
Women's clothing, trees. It's not like people in Rome the Roman Empire were crucified or anything.
You can make anything match if you just focus on vague similarities. All the differences.
What does this lead to? That like the crucifixion didn't happen? I mean, everybody agrees that like the crucifixion happened.
Yeah.
So like,
that's another thing.
They're reading the Bacchae and being like, let's invent a crucifixion, or
because
reading the Bacchae and they're like,
because we gotta. It's not even Dionysus in the tree. It's Pentheus now. So now Jesus is compared to Pentheus. So
so we're switching characters now too. Okay, yeah, I missed that for a second. So we're switching characters.
Robes in the ancient world were not women's clothing. Like, and Jesus isn't in a robe on the cross. Like, what is going on here? Like, you could just count. Like, if I just sit and listed the differences with this specific one. I don't understand how you can make this connection. You're really, again, this is just parallelomania. You're looking at these vague similarities and you're making these logical leaps, a direct non sequitur, that this is somehow evidence John is actually using the Bacchae to write about Jesus.
This reminds me of that.
I'm sorry. I don't see it. And like, this is not the way you establish a connection. Correlation is not causation. There are so many stories, so many real life events. You're going to find things you can connect it to. You got to do more work than just cherry pick out the similarities, the vague similarities at that, and then ignore the very specific and important differences here.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. It reminds me, I saw Meme Lord Monday in the chat. Maybe he can help us with a link or something, but I don't know if you allow links in the chat. But didn't he make a meme where it was like he was making all the connections to like Home Alone, and in the story of Jesus or something like that. Like that's kind of what this list sort of feels like. And it was just like Meme Lord Monday, I know you're out there, bro. Help us out here. We need to
I
post
mean, there
that.
was scholars who did this with like Jane Austen. Like, I remember if you read Greg Boyd's book, The Jesus Legend, he points out at one point scholars have gone through and they did this with like Jane Austen. They showed it was just a bunch of pagan myths. And again, it's very easy to do. You can go through just about anything and find connections. There's a great paper by Stephen Hymans called The Sun That Did Not Rise in the East, where he points out Roman sun worship was often thought in past scholarship to be basically be a copy of Syrian sun worship. And he just points out all of your similarities, all the similarities that were used are vague, too general, and they're just, we're assuming correlation equals causation. It's far much simpler explanation that both the Romans and the Assyrians saw the sun as important, attributed divinity to it, end of story. We don't need to establish these literary connections or religious connections from vague associations. There's got to be more legwork. You can't do that. Again, I could easily show you that like Socrates is a copy of Confucius because of similarities there. Or Ramesses II is a copy of Tutmosis III. Both were wealthy pharaohs, had massive building campaigns, fought major empires in the northeast. The Hittites for Ramesses and the Mitanni for Tutmosis. Both of them campaigned frequently in Canaan. I mean, like, both of them claim massive victories. You could do this with so many things. That doesn't mean that one is a myth based on the other. That doesn't follow.
No, it's real weird, man. Again, it just reminds me of those lists you see every Christmas with all the sounds really familiar. It's like the Mithras meme is being revived again, but in a different form. It's I thought we were over this kind of stuff, but apparently
never over it.
Yeah,
and you see,
like, didn't Lutheran satire already kind of make fun of this enough? So, but
yeah. All right, let's move ahead because I want to get to the water to wine miracles. That's what I'm here for. This is the water to wine miracles. We got to get into that. So let's play a little bit here, and we will then jump to those right after that. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Water to wine.
Michael Jones asserted that the earliest account of Dionysus turning water into wine happens to be a 3rd century text, which is after the New Testament.
Just making shit up.
Here's where he will be proven false.
Proven, not just
this is
not
the
just
proof.
shown.
This is the proof.
But I'm truly curious to know what kind of magical illusion he will perform to get out of this one. First thing we need to recognize.
I have 2 magic tricks up my sleeves. First is called reading comprehension skills, and the other is philosophical methodology. You just wait.
Is that Athenaeus, writing between 170 and 230 AD, is literally quoting works from the centuries before Jesus, well into the 3rd, 4th, even 5th centuries BC. But guess what? We don't even need to use a 3rd century source. Of course, texts from the 3rd century AD have Dionysus doing wine miracles.
Yep.
Because the tradition of this god performing miraculous wonders with wine and nature stretched back into classical Greece and even into the deeper past.
Okay, let's just get to the text here. Let's get to the first one. It's just before this point here. All right. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. I'm about to be proven wrong. Dionysus turned water into wine in pre-Christian text. Let's see what he's got.
This isn't all nonsense, and no, we don't need to shut up. Eudoxus says that persons who drink the water of Lake Clitorius taste a distaste for wine, and Theopompus asserts that the waters of the springs already named are productive of inebriety. According to Mucianus, there is a fountain at Andros, that water fountain, consecrated to Father Liber, Dionysus, from which wine flows during the 7 days appointed for the yearly festival of that god, the taste of which becomes like that of water the moment it is taken out of the sight of the temple.
Oh, for crying out loud, you got to be kidding me.
You have been debunked.
Hold on, Eric. Let's let the audience, because we don't want them to be sheep. We're just telling them what to think. Guys, type in the chat. Do you see the problem that Eric and I are seeing here? Okay, so type the problem if you see it. Okay, we were promised pre-Christian texts of Dionysus turning water into wine. So if you see the issue, go ahead and say what it is. Wait, hold on. I saw it. That's not water into wine. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. Yeah. Duh. So, okay. What do we have here? Let me let me cover them because I wrote them down so I would remember them. So what we have is I just passed. Okay. People drink from the water of a lake and it has the taste of wine. There's a fountain that replaces water with wine. Okay, that's similar, but that's not the same. And we have wine that tastes like water. Again, that's not turning water into wine. And here, I have an idea here. I actually made a slide here because I thought this would be helpful to sort of explain the issue here. So when we dive into this stuff, this is where philosophy is going to be helpful. We're going to use Aristotelian logic here. Okay. In Aristotelian logic, or Aristotelian categories, excuse me, there are two things, substances and accidents. Okay. A substance refers to the core, so the independent entity itself, like the person or the dog. Okay. Okay. Accidents are like properties or characteristics that can change without altering the fundamental nature of the substance. That's important. So in the case of a dog, okay, it's fundamentally a dog, and then accidents can change, like the fur, the size, the color, the length of the nose, perhaps, that kind of stuff. You get the deal? This is actually important in transubstantiation. So when we say the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Jesus, the substance changes. It becomes the body and blood of Jesus, but for our benefit, none of the accidents change. So it still retains the accidents of bread and wine because no one wants to experience flesh and blood in their mouth. It would be gross. So this relates to transubstantiation. When Jesus turned water into wine, he changed the substance and the accidents. In these examples, we have no substance change. We have water that has an accident of wine. We have wine that has an accident of water. And there's a fountain, and sometimes during the year, it shoots out wine. Okay. That's a substance replacement. That doesn't say that they scooped up water and then lo and behold, Dionysus did something and that water in the cup changed to wine. You have a fountain that just replaces. It starts shooting out wine. That's not the same, ladies and gentlemen. That's the problem there.
Yeah, this is wild stuff. This is the power of the myth.
And just to show you again, listen, I'll cite apologists here. So J.P. Holding, okay, I've got his book Shattering the Christ Myth where he talks about this as well. Article here on Dionysus and Jesus. You go down, he cites another apologist down here with this whole thing. Okay, right here. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so the motif of changing water into wine is not present in the Dionysus legends. The jugs of Ilus, for example, were not filled with water, but were empty. And the fount of wine in Andrus did not replace one of water. Most writers acknowledge that in the Johannine narrative, there is an implicit contrast between water used for Jewish purification rites and the wine given by Jesus. The former is characteristic of the old order. The latter is the new. In the ancient literature, Plutarch says that there was a spring at Hilartus, butchering that, with clear sprinkling, wine-colored, very pleasant tasting water. Okay, notice the accidents, but not the substance change. It's still water. in which the newly born Dionysus was bathed. Also, Pliny says that at Andros, on the festival known as Theodosia, spring in the temple of Bacchus flows with wine. Okay, says that of Elis, the priest of Dionysus, placed 3 large empty cauldrons in a sealed room to find them filled with wine when they returned the next day. And Ovid says that Liber, the Italian god identified with Bacchus, gave the daughters of the Delian king Aeneas the power to turn things into wine, a story associated with Dionysus. However, from these references, it is obvious that there are significant differences between the Dionysus legend and the story in John 2. The spring flowed with water, and the one at Andros flowed with wine, not water that had once been wine. And the empty cauldrons in the Elis temple were filled with wine, rather than water subsequently changed into wine. Key elements in John's story. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is we don't have a pre-Christian text of water being turned into wine. We have wine taking on an accident of water and vice versa. We have a fountain or a spring that normally shoots up water and it's shooting up wine. If I'm doing the dishes, okay, and I'm cleaning some of them, and all of a sudden out of the faucet starts shooting wine, but the water that's still on the rag is still water, that's not turning water into wine. That's somebody pumped wine into my faucet to trick me, but that's not a miracle of turning water into wine. It is a wine miracle for sure. No one's denying Dionysus did wine miracles, but that's not the same. And again, if you want to establish connection with John, you got to show they're specific.
This is hand grenade epistemology. It's like close enough, therefore it has the effect that I want it to have. If I throw it close enough, it must be good enough. This is bizarre. Like, again, if I were just going to argue as a skeptic against the Gospels, this would be the very, 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 very last way I would go about it. I would pick a totally different route. It's weird because you can use this methodology to make connections with any historical thing that you want. It's a wax nose that anything that kind of sounds vaguely similar, I can make some kind of connection, and therefore copying, invention.
And you listen, if you want to show like mimesis is at play here, okay? One of MacDonald's biggest critics, Carl Olof Sandnes, okay? When we see examples of mimesis in ancient world, they move between allusions to intertextuality, like where they clearly advertise. So he brings up this example of Emperor Eudocia. She wrote a poem where she borrowed lines from the Iliad and the Odyssey to narrate the biblical story from Genesis to Jesus. It's very clearly mimesis. It's very clearly. She quotes Homer verbatim at times, okay? Because that's how you do mimesis. You go from like direct quotation, direct advertising to allusion, then back to direct quotation. The Gospels don't do that. This is one of Olaf's biggest critiques of MacDonald and the mimesis crap, which is that it's very clear when we see this because we see direct intertextuality. Okay, he says so. Here's you can see he puts this in his book, the direct quotes from the Iliad and the Odyssey. We don't see that in the Gospels, especially with John when it comes to something like the Bacchae. Okay, he says the Aeneid and the True Story, these are other works, were outstanding examples of this. In both writings, however, emulation was broadcasted in ways that alerted the readers. The authors moved between advertised intertextuality and subtle emulation. Guess what's lacking in John? No advertised intertextuality with the Bacchae or any other Greek literature. Okay, another example is Sazabin brings up a guy who employed. When Julian took power, he like outlawed Christians from teaching the classics. So this guy basically wrote a bunch of classic-like works. He imitated the tragedies, Euripides, Pindar as well, and so that Christians could read classic-like works. Okay, everyone knew it was mimesis. Okay, because it was directly advertised. So this is one of the problems with trying to say that John is doing this with the Bacchae. There's no advertised intertextuality there. This is what we need to see. And this is why scholars, as Derek said in the earliest part, laugh at this when you take it into academia. This is a huge problem for the idea that this is what the Gospels are doing. And
well, buddy, just be ready for a 4-hour stream with Dennis MacDonald showing how that guy is an idiot. Apparently, obviously.
That's fine.
So.
That's fine. We got stuff planned. We already got stuff planned. They can do what they want. They're not going to like what's going to happen. But yeah. So, I mean, like, this is one of the biggest problems with a lot of this stuff is they're not the same. As nothing I said was wrong. We don't have pre-Christian texts of Dionysus turning water into wine. This 2-hour documentary, which is supposedly going to prove I'm wrong, doesn't. It cites Dionysus doing wine miracles that are not that. And then we don't see any intertextuality with the Bacchae and John's gospel. There's no direct advertising or direct quoting. That's a problem for this whole theory.
Yeah, this whole thing is just a mess from top to bottom. It's crazy. So I think you've said, you've said it all basically.
Let me pull up this one more section I want to play. So this is an important point that I want to hit on as well.
Honestly, this cannot get any more obvious that Dionysus turns a fountain of water.
It's so obvious.
Year. It flows with water year in, year out. That is what it does. But for 7 days of that year, it transforms that water into wine. And when you leave the site of the temple with the wine, it turns to water again.
Oh my God.
This is explicitly saying that a fountain at Andros which ran with water was transformed into wine during 7 days of the year. Water into wine? Hello?
Derek, that's not what it says. That you added that it turns water into wine. You added to the text of Pliny. Let me pull it up here. Okay, here's the Pliny text. Let's zoom in so it's big enough for everyone. Okay. Dionysus says that persons who drink the water of the lake take a distaste for wine. Okay, an accident. Okay, asserts that the water of the springs already named are productive of inebriety. Okay, again, another accident. Okay, there's a fountain at Andros, consecrated to Father Liber, from which wine flows during the 7 days appointed for the yearly festival. Okay, nothing here says it was transformed. The water was transformed. The miracle Dionysus is doing is he's not allowing water to flow, and instead wine is flowing through. Is it possible that they understood it as water turning into wine? Sure, but that's not what they say. If John is doing literary connections, that's not what he's doing here. If there was a literary connection, John would have to go to, like, I don't know, the pool of Siloam or something, and all of a sudden wine starts flowing out of one of the spouts or something there, something like that. This is not a water into wine miracle because it doesn't say that. Okay. And then it says the taste of which becomes like that of water. So then it directly says it's still wine. It just has an accident of water the moment it's taken out of the temple. So it doesn't turn into water. It's still wine. It's just given an accent or an accident. Okay. This is the biggest problem. Because the miracle Dionysus is performing is having the fountain shoot out wine instead of water. It's a replacement, not a transformation. You're adding the words like transformed or transformation to the text to make it fit with John. But you can't do that. You gotta, again, just focusing on difference is apologetics. Just focusing on similarities is parallelomania, as David Litwa has said. You got to do more than this. You cannot read transformed or turning water into wine into the text. That's not how it works.
But if you force it hard enough, it might squeeze in there. Like no. I mean, it's like close enough. I can make some kind of a connection if I just kind of close my eyes at certain points and just look at what I'm looking for.
They're similar.
It kind of smacks of just confirmation bias. Honestly, they accuse us of that all the time, but this just totally smacks of confirmation bias.
No one's saying they're not similar. No one's saying Dionysus is not doing miracles according to these legends.
Right.
How does John, again, if you're going to establish a literary connection, okay, this is where the philosophy comes in. If you're going to say John looked at the Bacchae and said, I want to emulate that, I want to do mimesis, or I want to copy that, something like that, where is the literary connection? This is just parallelomania. You find some similarities and you run wild with it, and then you start adding your own interpretation to the text. And that's the problem. That's not how this works. And it's like, this reminds, and again, here's another problem. This isn't in the Bacchae. Okay, this is something else entirely. So John is not reading this in the Bacchae. If you wanted Dionysus to turn water into wine, the perfect place would have been put in the Bacchae, because that's the story of Dionysus disguised as a human running around doing stuff. This is supposedly something like that happens when Dionysus is like a god. It's like people that try to do this with Asclepius. They'll go to like the temple of Asclepius and they'll find, oh, Asclepius healed a blind man just like Jesus. Okay, but that's happened after Asclepius has been appointed to godhood. And he is now, people are going to his temple and they're doing all sorts of miracles. And then you just cherry pick out the miracles like Jesus, even though there's like dozens of unrelated things to the Gospels. It's not in the story of when Asclepius was human and reviving people with the herbs he found. It's you're transporting it to the story of like the biographical account. And this isn't in the biographical account, or a story Dionysus walking around as a man. So now that's also problematic.
I mean, going back to Asclepius, I mean, what is Jesus supposed to do? If there was a person named Jesus who had the power to heal the sick, and if there is a God and he wanted to take on human flesh and show himself to humanity, what is he going to do with the blind guy? Be like, hey, buddy, someday 2,000 years from now, mythicists from the future, they're going to totally look at this and be like, what a total Asclepius ripoff. And then you have to multiply all of these different myths to just be like, well, yeah, he's copying this myth and he's copying this myth, and then he's copying Jewish stuff in the Old Testament, and it's all copying. And the gospel writers never had an original idea in their entire life. And everything that they say about being witnesses, well, that must be a total lie. And we are just going to completely dismiss all the positive evidence for the historical reliability of the Gospels, or even the genre of the Gospels, because we can make these kind of like vague connections. So checkmate, Christians, it's over.
Well, yeah, even if Derek is right, this doesn't mean anything Jesus did is a myth. Because again, if he wants to demonstrate his divinity and his power over the pagan deities, like what Yahweh does in Exodus, where he uses a lot of the powers of the Egyptian gods against them. Like Ra controls the sun, you have the power of darkness, you have the frogs, which are associated with like one of the frog gods, I think, something like that. Like Jesus could be doing something similar. I'm going to show that I truly am the real God and do the thing that only the pagan gods can do in legend. This is Nathan Doe's point. Like none of this gets Derek to the conclusion that everything you see in the Gospels is a myth. You've made logical leaps there. No.
Well, and I think we even remember he came on my channel and we had a long conversation, and we just asked him like, hey, Derek, like if a miracle ever did happen in the past, like how would you know it? And I think he did a video later on and he was just like, I can't. It's not possible. I can't be convinced by anything in a historical account that a miracle happened. And we kind of brought to the point. It's like, well, what is Jesus supposed to do if everything is going to be accused of him just copying something else? Like he's completely handcuffed because, gosh, there's all these myths and he can't be accused of being a plagiarist. So,
right. It was well illustrated in your discussion with Mythvision a while back, where he insisted that he didn't want to look at any of the data too closely, but would rather draw superficial parallels from very abstract levels. I don't remember that conversation specifically, but I kind of feel like we're getting that there. We're making logical leaps from superficial parallels here that again are just not supported. Again, even if you believe, for example, there are dying and rising gods, for example, well, you just read Tryggve Manager's book, The Riddle of Resurrection. He notes you can't make the logical leaps from the dying and rising gods that has anything to do with Jesus and his death and resurrection. They're completely different categories. There's no connections here whatsoever. So even when you get into the scholarship, you have problems there. Thoughts on Alex O'Connor? I think he's a great guy. I pray for him. I hope he becomes a Christian for sure.
He's my favorite atheist. At least that's on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I would say apostate prophet, but he's agnostic now, and so we can't say.
AP.
Greatly appreciate both of your ministries. Any thoughts on the book Christ Before Jesus: Evidence for the Second Century Origins of Jesus?
Haven't heard of it.
Who wrote that? Hold on, I'm gonna look it up. Christ Before Jesus book. written by Matthew Britt and Yaron Wingo. I have not heard of this book at all. I'll take a look at it later. I have not. Okay, let me get back into the video here. Only a couple more sections I want to play.
Mucinous, who was 3 times consul of Vespasian, a pretty important, powerful dude, and his rise to fame in the year of the 4 emperors vouched for this as well. It is accredited by the Mucinous, who was 3 times consul, that the water flowing from a spring in the temple of Father Liber, Dionysus's title in Latin, on the island of Andros, always has the flavor of wine on nones of Janus.
Okay. That is not turning water into wine. Eric, if I gave you a Bud Light, you're going to say...
Bud Light, bro. You're canceled.
You're going to say, yes, cancel, because you know why? It tastes like water. So if you were like, why did you give me this Bud Light? It tastes like water. I would have been like, oh, do you see the miracle? The Bud Light turned into water. No, that's not how it works. Having a taste of something is not the same thing.
Also, I'm Pentecostal, so I would never drink a Bud Light. It would have to be something non-alcoholic. You know this, IP.
I'm going to cancel you now. You can't come to ETS with us if you don't drink. That's the rule.
I'm out.
Dude, like every ETS or like apologetic event, like even when we do like modern day debate stuff, like they're all like, let's go to a cigar bar. And I'm like, I hate cigars. And so like I always come home smelling like smoke.
Yeah.
I have to
Mike Winger.
Tolerate it.
Mike Winger doesn't drink. I bet he doesn't.
I can neither confirm nor deny if Mike Winger drinks.
Well,
but so we'll not be saying anything on that because
I'm kidding. I don't want to get him in trouble.
The island of Naxos, wine gushed forth from a spring, a miracle that first occurred when Dionysus married Ariadne there. See Seneca's Oedipus, lines 491.
Okay, that's again a spring shooting out wine. That's not water turning into wine. If you have a spring shooting out water and all of a sudden behind the water comes out wine, you go, oh, it's been replaced. What has to happen is you're catching the water in it, and all of a sudden the water in like your cup or your bucket or something, that turns into wine. That would have to be the miracle for it to be a similarity here. So that also does not get us there. Let me jump ahead to one of my favorite parts of this video.
What will apologists say now? Well, that wine miracle didn't happen at a wedding in Cana with 6 jars of water after the party drank up all the wine they currently had, saving the best for last. Derek, show me that exact myth before Jesus.
That's exactly what we said.
Your reaction. That's exactly what we said.
That's exactly what you said. Yeah, that's because it's got to be like 1-for-1 exact. Otherwise, but that's not what we've been saying.
Again,
we're just saying vague similarities, and these are pretty vague. And yeah,
again, the specific line Derek was trying to prove me wrong from the lecture was I said we have no pre-Christian text of Dionysus turning water into wine. I'm 100% right about that. Okay. The texts he brought up are not water turning into wine. And of course, I was aware of them, but I remember thinking years ago, okay, well, these aren't water turning into wine. No one's going to bring these up. Come on. Like, just read them. They're wine miracles for sure, but that's not the water to wine miracle. So that transformation is important here. So no, that's not what we would say, Derek. We just simply say the texts don't say what you think they say.
Right. Yeah. That's basically end of story.
Yeah. I think I got let's see. There was another section I wanted to play because we're gonna get it's almost Christmas. And he's trying to draw a connection because they're trying to bring back the Christmas pagan stuff.
Oh no.
I know. Yeah. Tim O'Neill's gonna pull his hair out at some point.
Involves the infant Dionysus as a newly born deity, which turns out Christians later set the celebration of Jesus' birth and his Epiphany on January 6th.
Okay.
Aligning with Dionysus' celebration, as described by Pliny. Could it really be a coincidence that Christians chose to celebrate Jesus' Epiphany on the exact same day as the ancient Epiphany of Dionysus? Really? When you weigh out the evidence of Dionysus' influence in many other areas, not just wine miracles on Jesus, it becomes pretty obvious to me that this is no coincidence. The same way Christians turned temples into churches and kept sacred spaces sacred, they likely did the same with sacred holidays and dates. Later, Macrobius.
Okay. Here's the problem with a lot of this stuff. Okay. I believe it's not like was a Roman wide thing. I think this was just associated with certain villages in like Macedonia. But like the January 6th date is not in John. This came from centuries later.
Yeah.
Okay. This came when Christians are trying to like distance themselves from pagans. Like they're going to do this then. In the Feast of Epiphany was a minor feast. Like if you were trying to copy this, why not place like the resurrection date? I mean,
right.
There's just a lot of problems here because again, this is not in John. This is not in the Bacchae. This is something else entirely. It's coming about much, much later. I think this is even coming after the Donatist split, for example. So pretty late. I mean, we're talking about after Constantine at this point. Yeah, lot of problems here with trying. Again, it's because it's not in John. We've moved into a completely different area, though, in terms of what the Christians are doing. So let me get this straight. So John was copying the Bacchae, and then all the church fathers missed this. But then somehow Christians in the 4th century figured it out, but didn't write anything about it. But then gave us the Feast of the Epiphany on the same date, but they didn't say why they were copying. Eric, help me out. What am I missing here?
I'm just like, what is the point? Like, yeah, it's weird, man. It's just weird. It's like you said, it's not in John. Later Christians would have to come along and go, you know what? That's a cool connection. Just like kind of the other connections we see in John's gospel, these documents that we take as being really historically reliable and stuff. Like they're not reading these gospels in that kind of way. And then they're like, let's make a cool pagan connection here. Mm-hmm. Just like all the cool pagan connections in John's gospel. Again, we're just making connections and going, okay, well, there's a connection here. So isn't that suspicious? I don't know. It's weird.
I also haven't looked, but I'm going to look more into the Dionysus Epiphany thing. I want to know what texts mention it. I want to know when this is being celebrated. Is it really early? How big of a feast of this? Is it Roman wide? Is there a reason Christians would have copied this? I mean, this is stuff that like some of the scholars, like Thomas Schmidt, have brought up. He brought up, like, for example, the Lord of Misrule. Like, it sounds similar to the Saturnalia festival, but he points out if this was copied from Saturnalia, why is it happening in Britain and not starting in Rome, where Saturnalia would have been the major holiday during the Roman Empire? Like, it's being celebrated. The Lord of Misrule idea that's happened at Christmas for a couple centuries starts taking off in Britain, not at the ground zero of the Saturnalia festival is. And so sometimes people just do things on holidays, like role reversal, crazy celebration things. You don't need you just appeal to human psychology for that. You don't have to appeal to direct copying. And like when it comes to holidays, like this is one thing I remind people of. There were Roman pagans, Greek pagans, Egyptian pagans, Persian pagans, North African pagans, Celtic pagans, Scandinavian pagans, Germanic pagans. All of those pagans had various gods, and all those various gods had various festivals. So they covered a lot of the calendar. And a lot of times they aligned their festivals on important celestial days. You know who was also interested in important celestial days? Christians, but not because of paganism, because of the Bible. Genesis 1, day 4, that kind of stuff. So if both groups are looking at the stars, they're going to try, and they think they're important for what God or the gods are doing. They're going to align festivals on certain dates that could correlate with festivals or certain celestial things or harvest festivals because they're both interested in those. It has nothing to do with one copying the other. They're both drawing from a similar source. The changing seasons, the signs in the heavens. Like, this is why we like what is it called? Samhain comes around the beginning of November, as well as All Saints Day. Scholars know it's a coincidence they kind of line up. Neither was probably copying the other.
Yeah, it's it goes back to the old, atheist memes you'd see 10, 20 years ago on Facebook, where it's like, isn't it a coincidence that Mithras and was born on December 25th of a virgin and stuff like that? It just smacks of that kind of low level kind of stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Let me see here. I think I got 2 more seconds I want to play, then we're gonna get to the rest of the super chats. So get them in now. If you have questions you want us to answer, things you want us to respond to, and we will get to them. So let's play. I want to play these last few sections here.
So when you hear people resist that Jesus has influence from Dionysus, or they only want to insist that it was all later Christian influence, they truly are ignorant of what they're talking about. They are not looking at...
Okay, let's be clear. I don't actually say that the later texts have Christian influence. Glenn Bowersock made that argument. My argument is, if they're in late texts, how do you not know it was Christian influence? If you want to establish influence from mere correlations, which is a logical leap, how can we, and they're in late texts, how can you not say they're late? And again, I'll remind the audience, Derek said in the beginning, the overwhelming academic consensus rejects this. Are they also ignorant of all this stuff? Are we saying all of academia is stupid or ignorant? It depends on how you're defining ignorance here.
And see, this is the unfortunate thing, is like, I've seen some of the guests on Mythvision seem to imply that like all these people are just influenced by like latent apologetics and conservatism, and like there's only like a handful of scholars who are doing real scholarship, and that would include them, of course, and Dennis McDonald and like 2 other people. And it's just like, I think one of them even said like everybody else is just, they're not even on the golf course playing the game. But this is just, this is the same person said that Richard Carrier is a serious historian. And it's just like, but yeah, we lack common sense. It's just, maybe there's a reason why everybody is attacking these goofy ideas, is because they're just out there, man.
Yeah, and well, so we're not saying Derek is wrong because he's not in the consensus. I mean, we can easily show the philosophical problems here, but still, it does raise a red flag. Consensus is a tool, not a hammer, or
right.
Tool, not a right, I think is what Carreco said. Here, let me play this last section here.
The facts for them. It's much more about faith and security beyond this world, after this thing we call life. I mean, let's be real. Life is hard, and everyone looks for answers to its riddle. However, I choose the tough path of swimming upstream to what I was told and raised to believe. I do not want anyone watching this to target any specific apologist with hate or anger.
Too late. That's already happened on Twitter. Too late.
But truly feel compassion and empathy for them. They are trapped in a vicious cycle of defending something which could never be proven. They strive to keep the castle from tumbling down. This castle or house of historical true faith and their apologetics would do better if they changed their tactics from making absurd claims. Just as Christ said, I now say. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. More people will rise up to the facts of Christianity, rising within the mythic framework of all the popular gods and heroes in the world it was born into. It doesn't just look similar. It's literally lifting from the same cultural fabric and mythic literary themes of these other popular cults. Christianity, at its foundation, is another Yahwistic mystery cult, with its demigod Jesus claiming to be the true vine, transforming water into wine as his first miracle, as an epiphany that he is truly divine, well after the famous tales of Dionysus doing the same thing.
Nope.
For me, this message truly is freeing. Showing the shared connections between these stories makes the world a bigger place.
Okay, we've not established shared connections. That correlation is not causation. You got to actually show there's a causal link. Do the gospel authors do the same thing like they do with the Old Testament? Hey, we're quoting the scriptures here, 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 here. We're getting this from Moses and the prophets. Do they say, oh, but we're also getting this from Dionysus and the Odyssey and the Iliad? No. Are there direct quotes that we can see? No. It's subtle. It's allegedly subtle emulation that we're supposed to pick up on. Apply transvaluation when it's convenient and ignore all of the differences that really make us go. Like, well, that's probably just a vague similarity. That's just parallelomania.
That basically the early church all received as history, is actual historical reports. I'm sure he'll throw out, oh, but Justin Martyr, he compares the pagan stories or whatever. But then he also calls them memoirs.
Well, notice what Justin Martyr's doing. He's highlighting vague similarities to say, please don't kill us. He's not doing it because he thinks they're real. He's saying, look, guys, please don't kill us. You worship Dionysus, who's a son of a god. We worship a son of a god. Can't you treat us like that? You don't kill the atheist philosophers. You call us atheists. Why are you killing us? He's not saying, yes, we are atheists, just like those atheist philosophers. He's saying he's making vague comparisons so that he doesn't die. This is not like a deep analysis where he's like, yes, I totally see these connections here. No, that's not what's going on. So this is taking him wildly out of context.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems obvious from other quotes that he's taking these as memoirs, as biographies, and everybody else. But it took, about 2,000 years for the mythicist kind of crowd to go, well, holy cow, look at all these vague parallels and kind of connections that we make if we kind of like stare at it hard enough and piece it together. I mean, that's
Justin Martyr also says, I think in section 55, that when the demons were copying Moses, they did a bad job. So he even admits the pagan parallels are bad. Like so according to his own theory, it doesn't work well.
No, it does not. So yeah, it's weird. I mean, that was a heck of an altar call there. But yeah, I don't know. I think again, what bugs me is just the whole idea that he thinks that we have to be Christians. No, if I find out,
it's like when Christians go up to atheists like Derek and go, well, the reason you're not a Christian anymore, it's because you just want to sin, which pisses Derek off, and rightly so, but should piss him off. But then he's got the audacity to turn around and spend hours doing that to us. Oh, you just believe it because you need it to be true. If you don't like it, why do you do it to us?
Yeah, Christians watching this, don't do that to people, please. For the love of Pete, don't do that to people. But yeah, it's weird, and I don't think it helps. It's like Christianity. I think everybody, if they're really being honest with themselves, would like it to be true, and also part of them would like it to not be true. There is a part of you that, and a lot of people that go, you know what, my life would be easier, and there would be a lot of other directions that I could go if I wasn't a Christian, and things that I could do. And then on the other hand, a lot of people would love to be a Christian because, hey, there's an eternity with God, and I can. It's comforting to know that God loves me and He cares about me and different things like that. So I think if we're honest, like everybody has a desire towards it to some extent, maybe a greater extent than others, and some people to a greater extent than others have a desire against it. And it's like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Making weak connections and goofy parallels, and kind of going, Christianity defeated. What's wrong with you, Christians? Come on, it's so obvious. Isn't really the way to go about making your point. But
And even if they're that obvious, it doesn't matter. Because, like, again, we know that Matthew is trying to paint Jesus as another Moses. Luke is trying to say he's another King David. Mark is trying to say he's another apocalyptic prophet. Like, we know they're doing that. That doesn't mean anything they're saying was mythology or they're making up stories about him. It's very easy to look at current events of the day and go, that reminds me of, I know what to do. People do that today. And it was on steroids in the ancient world. Tacitus did it. Virgil did it. Lucian did it. This is just what people did. So, like, I even if, like, for all these hours of documentaries doing these parallels, it doesn't even get to the conclusion this is all myth. You got to do more than that, especially considering we can go quite easily. The Gospels are Greco-Roman biographies. They're in a genre aiming to capture real history. I know you don't agree with that. You take like a slightly modified view, but the consensus is Roman.
I take a modified view, but I think that they're trying to capture real history. I think it's historical reportage, and that's even what Lewis, who, I mean, I know it's cliche for us to quote C.S. Lewis, but too bad C.S. Lewis is based. He said, "I've been reading poems, romances, Vision literature, legends, myths all my life. I know what they're like. I know not one of them is like this. Of this text, there are two possibilities. Either this is reportage, though it may contain errors, but pretty close up to the facts, or else some unknown writer in the 2nd century without known predecessors or successors suddenly anticipated the whole technique of modern novelistic, realistic narratives." And so, and then he goes on to say, he's pretty spicy. He says, the reader who doesn't see this simply has not learned to read. And I think Lewis, being given his background, knew what he read all of these myths. And that was actually his objection initially to Christianity. And it was Tolkien. It was just like, well, what if, like, a myth actually became a fact? And, like, why don't you re-examine the Gospels? And then he re-examined the Gospels and realized, like, yeah, like, I could see some of that, but this is reportage. These people are trying to report the facts as they know it. This isn't just like these purple, weird, mystical legends and stories like we see in the Bacchae or whatever. So
I'll get to some super chats, but this one's related, so I'm gonna push it up first. He says the parallels reflect a shared archetypal theme of divine transformation with mimesis, criticism emphasizing creative adaptation, not direct copying. Okay, we know what mimesis looked like in the ancient world. Read Sandness, read Lucian's True Story, the Aeneid. They don't do this the way the Gospels supposedly do it. They do direct advertising of their mimesis. They'll quote, like, the Odyssey, they'll quote the Iliad, then they'll do subtle emulation, then they'll go back to direct advertising, then subtle emulation. Okay, that's not what the Gospels are doing. Everyone has known for 2,000 years that what we see in Lucian or Virgil is mimesis. For somehow that's been missed with the Gospels. Well, no, it's because they're not doing the actual things we see with mimesis. This is why I gave the slides earlier from Sanders' book. We know what mimesis looks like. The Gospels don't fit that. This is a problem for the whole theory. You just can't think mimesis is just endless subtle emulation. It's got to be direct advertising in the other examples that they use. So this doesn't work. And again, if it's creative adaptation, you've just made your entire theory completely unfalsifiable. Because anytime we bring up a difference, you go, well, that was adapted. That was changed. That was transvaluation. Okay, that's an ad hoc rescue. Yeah. No matter what we bring up, it's just going to be ad hoc rescue. Oh, well, that was changed. Well, they had to change that. Okay, well, how are we supposed to know you're right if we don't assume you're right? If there's no way to falsify this is important in science. Something needs to be falsifiable so that we know that it's actually testable and can be verified with data. If there's a way to falsify it, we should test that. If there's no way to falsify this, it's not a valid theory. When it comes to the resurrection hypothesis, we argue it can be falsified by offering a more parsimonious explanation. With this, we're never given that chance, because anytime we bring up something that challenges this, you go, well, creative adaptation, transvaluation, ad hoc rescues just make your theory unfalsifiable, and that throws it out of any sort of way of evaluating it critically.
No, spot on.
All right, let's get to some super chats here. President Christopher says, indifference is the greatest hate. Must I sell my soul to get to guest on a big shot YouTuber? I curse God if I have.
Yeah, just get that out of here.
Okay. No. I'm going to address this. I'm not going to read it all, but listen, sir, especially using that language, you're definitely never coming on my channel. Second of all, you seem to be worshiping fame here. That's terrifying. That's your God and that's your idol. And feeding that would be the worst thing we could do for you. I would tell you to come to Christ, give up quest for fame, because that's what you're worshiping. And God will never give you something that you have placed before him, period, end of story. So I will pray for you. I hope that doesn't come across as condescending. This is not the way to go, especially using that language. And it's clear you're trying to chase something that will never give you real happiness and satisfaction.
Touch grass.
Seriously.
Like
Touch
for
grass.
real. Log off for a month. It would help you.
Isn't the argument it happened before, so it's a myth, just inherently flawed? Surely the most it does is slightly reduce credibility. Yeah, slightly. Doesn't do much. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I have just read so much sociology and so much philosophy at this point. Anytime someone brings up a correlation, immediately I say to my head, correlation isn't causation. So what? Right. Like, just because the Egyptians had a sun god and the Romans had a sun god, that doesn't mean there's a connection. That one was copying the other. There needs to be more going on here. We know the Romans copied Greek mythology because it's the exact same stories. Okay, we know that the New Testament is relying heavily on the Old Testament because they're directly quoting it. If the Gospels are doing that with Greco-Roman literature, okay, that again, as I've said numerous times, that wouldn't show it's a myth, but I need more than just vague correlations. I want all the books behind you. Anyway, I was wondering how strong you think the transcendental argument from Van Til is. I really appreciate you and bros like you. Oh, Eric loves the transcendental argument. He loves it. He breathes it in and out every day.
Yeah, I'm a big precept kind of guy. No, I don't like it.
Oh, yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, it's not my thing to go to. I understand the logic of it the more I've looked at it. It's not. I think that's really hard to articulate, make the case, and I do see some problems in applying it in a metaphysical sense that I don't have time to get into. But that's.
I feel like in some ways it feels a little lazy to me, like that you're just looking. I think some apologists look at it as like a silver bullet to just bark it at the atheists. I would rather just kind of, and I know this is where me and the precepts would not agree, is like, I would rather go on shared ground where I can actually give them evidence. I understand like transcendental arguments in terms of like morality and different things like that to some extent, but like, why don't we just talk about all the things that are in nature or in science or whatever else that we can kind of point to, or his history, that they could actually observe instead of just trying to look for this silver bullet. Like, without God, you can't do logic. I don't know. It's just gonna. I see that I don't see it as very effective, even if it was logically valid. But that's just me.
Earlier this year, Derek appeared with Rationality Rules and complained that David Wood accused them of Jesus mythicism in a video not directed at them. Then this, I don't know much about that. I didn't watch a lot of that exchange because I had other things to do. So
yeah, I have no idea.
But yeah, that would be weird if he did that because I don't think David Wood did accuse him of that. So I don't know. Best resources on disproving these types of parallels, including other comparative religious approaches to Jesus. I don't know if there's one book. Okay, J.P. Holding is an apologist. He's not a scholar. He's wrote a book called Shattering the Christ Myth. He does some of that kind of stuff in there. I don't agree with everything in there. I think there's some things I think don't really work. Some things do. Take it with a grain of salt. Riddle of the Resurrections. You know, Mark Smith has got a paper on this. I think I talked about it. Check out my video, Jesus versus Baal, to get the title of that paper. I know I used it in that a lot, and he goes through a couple. So go through that one. I know J.Z. Smith as well has done some stuff on this. So check out that as well. Those should give you some good stuff to go with. What is J.Z. Smith's book? Hold on. That's going to bother me. I have to think about Dying Rising God book. He's got a whole book. I've read it in the past, and it's just not coming to mind as I sit here. What is that? So there's another book called The Jesus Legend by Paul Rhodes Eddy and Greg Boyd, which might be a good book.
It's
They
okay.
covered, yeah.
It doesn't go into like a lot of the parallels. It does go into some, but I think it does go into a lot of important ground from an epistemological level, as well as as tackling other things about what the Gospels actually are and different things like that. And so, yeah.
What is that Jonathan Smith book? That is going to bother the crap out of me. Oh, it's Drudgery Divine on the comparison of early Christianities. And he has a section where he covers some pagan deities in there. Derek is the Shabir Ali of mysticism. Well, he's not even a Jesus mythicist, so I don't follow the connection.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I don't know about that. Here we go. Why won't Derek make the comparison to Exodus 7:20? I have that up. It says Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. He lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood. I see. Okay, I see. So yeah, there's a water into blood miracle. Now, if
transvaluation.
Transvaluation, ladies and gentlemen. We got him, you see? Now, if Moses lifted up his staff and all of a sudden they looked downstream and they saw blood rushing over the water, that would be a replacement miracle. Like, a fountain usually shoots out water and it shoots out wine. But what we have is Moses actually turning the water into blood. So... But if Moses had done something like that, no one would think he turned the water into blood. They would think he summoned blood to cover the water. Likewise, the same with what we saw with those alleged parallels. It doesn't not follow. Do you think there are any examples of other religions borrowing myths from each other? Well, yeah, I mentioned the Greeks and the Romans borrowing. Well, the Romans clearly borrowed everything from the Greeks as much as they possibly could. Let's see here. What was the other one I was thinking of? So I think there are some connections between, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but like Canaanite myths and what we see in Mesopotamia. And we also see, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh is clearly drawing on earlier legends. Like it gets the flood story from the Atrahasis. So there's an example. But like, we're using the term religion as more of a modern term. So, we're talking about the ancient mythologies. It's hard to even really classify them as religions. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Examples of other religions borrowing myths from each other. I mean, the Quran seems like it takes a lot of myths.
No, there you go.
7 sleepers in the cave. That was 7 Christian guys in Ephesus. They borrow from all kinds of Christian myths, Jewish myths, all kinds of stuff. Those connections have been pointed out. That actually fit.
He said Christian myths. They're going to clip that now. They're going to clip that.
Yeah.
You see?
But that actually fit. And so yeah, that would be one of those kind of connections. But Muhammad just was the ear. He was called the ear for a reason, and he was illiterate. And so he thought a lot of stuff was Bible. That wasn't Bible. So
let me pull this next one up here. So what's the best evidence against 3 Corinthians? Speaking to an atheist about this. Thank you. Praise Jesus.
I was just looking at this not that long ago, and I saw it in the chat, and I was getting really irritated with myself because I don't remember. There was some. It's like everything that I had in my head about the particular topic just went completely blank. And so, if they want to email me, testifyapologetics@gmail.com. I do have a couple of books, some resources that I can refer to them. But for some reason, I'm completely blanking on the specifics right now. And it's really bothering me. Kind of like you see somebody you recognize and you're like, hey, what's his name? And so I'm just having one of those deer in headlights moments. So I apologize.
Yeah, I think the authorship is even more contested for 3 Corinthians than it is for even like Titus or 1 Timothy. Like it's just wildly not Paul, from what I can tell. And there's not a lot of early church father attestation. I mean, I think it's pushing like Gnostic theology at places, but again, I'd have to double check on that.
Yeah.
Best books for philosophy for beginners. Also Skibbity. Skibbity wah wah wah. Skibbity wah wah wah. Skibbity boink boink ice. Skibbity. Sorry, this is a song stuck in my head now.
Oh no, he's doing the Gen Alpha brain rot stuff. Yeah,
I know, but I'm thinking of that song from Big Little. I think that's what they're called. The Russian band or something like. They do like you know what I'm talking about, right?
I don't remember that one. I remember Scatman. But maybe that's dating me.
No, you gotta. Oh man, I can't play it because the stream will get demonetized. But man, there's an old song, Skibbity, like Skibbity wah wah wah, song by Little Big. Yeah. Okay, so I'll put this up here so people can know I'm not crazy. I know what I'm talking about here. Okay, see, there's a song, Skibbity, came out like in like 2018. Yeah.
But does it have Riz?
So, it does have a lot of Riz.
It's got W.
Look at that Riz.
It's got W Riz. Look at that.
Yeah, it's got a lot of Riz in it.
It's got
they do
tons
a whole
of
Skibbity dance.
That's got a lot of aura. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the first time we heard it, I was playing like Just Dance with my daughter, and like we were like, "What is this song? It is so weird. It's like Weird Al of Russia."
The Russians are always doing something. They are based.
Let's not get into politics. Anyway, with best books for philosophy for beginners. Oh, I have one here. Let me pull it up. I'm gonna just grab it for you. I have it right behind me. Let's go by my eyes. Okay, here's a good one here. Okay. Introducing Philosophy by Robert Solomon is pretty good. The reason why I like it is because he'll quote the philosophers at pretty strong length, and then he adds commentary that's really useful in explaining, and he does a really good job at articulating what they're trying to say. So if you have a hard time reading Kant, he's like, well, Kant is trying to say this. Good at that. So check out that. It's a textbook often used in colleges, I believe. Also, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview is great. Very good section on epistemology. I recommend that.
Yep.
Testify. When are you going to do more critical scholarship videos?
I'm not sure. I've been on this weird Islam kick, and I don't know why I got into it in the first place. I just got bored and started to find it really interesting. And so I did do a series of videos kind of about contradictions in Bart Ehrman. And honestly, it didn't do super well, which is fine. I mean, it's still valuable content, and whether it does well or not, I still want to make content that helps people, even if it helps just one person. So I don't know. I thought about doing some videos on like gospel authorship and getting into some of the main objections of gospel authorship and just doing like a series of videos, but I'm still kind of working that out. So the answer is, I don't know. I know maybe people are getting sick of me ragging on Islam. So
I'm not.
Okay. Well, I'll get to it eventually. It's always going to be a part of my channel, is talking about the historical reliability of the Gospels. And so it's just a matter of time. And when I get interested in it again, I'm always interested in it. But I feel like I said so much making a positive case, and I did make those videos just talking about how to think about looking at contradictions, that I just had to find a topic on it that interests me enough to make a video, I guess. So it sounds like I'm making excuses and I'm rambling, but
yeah, it's excusegetics.
It's excusegetics. That's right. That's right. Excusegetics.
That's what I need to get that clip, because I'm gonna use it anytime I see an atheist come up with like a response to an argument. I'm just gonna call it an excuse, like
excusegetics. Yeah,
I think that's fair. They want to.
Before Carl Sagan
tells
tells me
so. Are excuses.
Yeah.
I'll just say, like, oh well, all your arguments are also excuses if you want to play that game.
Yeah.
I will never stop watching your Islam videos. He's talking to you.
Well, good. The good thing you don't live in Pakistan.
You can't.
Because you can't. Well, you can't watch at least one of them. And weirdly, since it happened, my last video on Islam only got like a third of the views that it normally did. I don't know. Maybe I biffed it on the title. Maybe I biffed it on the thumbnail. But yes, watch it. Watch it.
Maybe
Actually, I tried the argument out. It's kind of similar to the argument that we talked about last time I was on IP, and I tried it out on the guys on EF Dawa yesterday, and they were not happy with me. And that was the real excusegetics, because Jesus's real followers, it was spiritual dominance, it was moral dominance, it was invisible dominance. It has nothing to do with population or influence or numbers or anything else like that. Surah 355 and 6115 are just invisible qualities that you can't see, and there is no evidence for any Jesus following true Jesus followers for 500 years, and that's not a problem for them, even though we have evidence for pretty much every religious group that you could possibly imagine among Jews, Gnostics, Christians, and pagans. But for some reason, the Islamic followers of Jesus don't exist. So check. Yeah.
Why do you think rationalism took so long to formulate in Christian societies? Are you talking about the philosophical rationalism, or just you using rationalism in a colloquial sense? I mean, rationalism, of course, is an enlightened idea from recent philosophical ideas. I mean, you see, it basically was just sort of like given its title recently, but you can totally see that in like Augustine and earlier church fathers as well. They're being very rational in how they speak of these things. They're not I don't think they're empiricists. I think they're rationalists. So I don't think it took so long. I just think it just wasn't given the title that it was until recently. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
Mimesis is the imitation of reality in art, while mimesis criticism and analyzes how texts creatively reinterpret or adapt existing themes and narratives. Yes, we know that. But the problem is that that's not what the Gospels are doing. Okay, right. We know the way mimesis works. No one thinks Lucian's true story is not mimesis. No one thinks the Aeneid is not mimesis. But we can clearly see the direct advertising of the text they're doing. So like when you do it in art, like people will make it pretty evidently known they're copying some earlier form of art. You just can't look at like somebody drawing a sunset and go, oh, that's clearly someone also copying this earlier drawing of a sunset. Or like a portrait is clearly copying, like let's say you saw a portrait of a woman and you'd be like, oh, someone was clearly copying the Mona Lisa from Leonardo da Vinci. No. That's not how it works. People like to draw women and men. And so portraits are a pretty common theme. That's way too general of a parallel. Same would apply here. Just because there are miracles in the Gospels, that doesn't mean it's mimesis. There needs to be more. Okay. Again, a lot of the arguments for the Gospels are just cherry picking out similarities and ignoring a plethora of differences and ignoring how the mimesis works in other works. And you just go through, say, in this book, you'll see what we mean.
If there was no miracles in the Gospels, I wonder if these guys would even be attempting mimesis. You know
Possibly,
what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Maybe now I'm psychoanalyzing. I don't know.
What do you think of Richard Carrier's works and views? Oh, Eric loves Richard Carrier. Oh, he never shuts up about how amazing Richard Carrier is. Isn't that right?
I like how condescending he is in all his blog posts and like really salty. It's like I find it. I read it for humor. I really do. And like I like how he has a very positive view of himself. I'll put it that way.
Find you a woman that loves you like Richard Carrier loves Richard Carrier. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that, yeah. I forget the athlete, but it was like I love me. It was Terrell Owens back in the day. He's like, I love me some me.
Yeah, I'm not fan, especially of the philosophy stuff he's put out. Really not convinced of the ethics.
Weirdly enough, he understands Bayes' theorem okay. He just puts a lot of garbage into all of his theories, and so he gets a lot of garbage out.
Dude, I wish I could find that article. Did Richard Carrier exist? Have you seen that one?
Yeah, it's on what's his name? Right Reason is the name of the blog. and it was he used to be a guy. He's from New Zealand. I'm blanking
Oh yeah,
on
I
his
got it.
name.
I
Yeah,
got it here. Someone don't use
Glenn
his own
Peoples.
his own reasoning
Yeah.
that he uses to show that Jesus doesn't exist. Someone said, well, let's just use your own reasoning to show you don't exist. And
Yeah.
this is a great article. I laughed a lot reading this. It's phenomenal.
It's classic.
Using Bayes' theorem to show you Richard Carrier cannot exist. It is phenomenal. Did Carrier ever respond to that?
I don't know. He responds to a lot of things. He probably did. Who knows?
Yeah. Can you do a review of Jay Warner versus Michael Licona on gospel transmission? Paula G has titled it Christian versus Christian. It's like a 2-minute video. I mean, isn't that from like 3 or 4 years ago or something?
I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what he's talking about.
This is from like years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like something I'd be interested in jumping in, to be honest.
I'll tell you what, Sean, I will think about it. But I mean, I prefer to do reviews of more recent stuff because it's like hot off the press. It's more like relevant. I'll do some older stuff at times, but I don't know. I don't really also like getting into disputes like that. I don't want to cause bad blood in the body.
Yeah, you're just jumping in the middle of somebody else's argument between each other, and I think Proverbs says that the person who does that is kind of a fool. So,
well, especially if it's between Christians, I don't want to do that with them. I try to stay out of that as much as I can because just for my own safety and not to I don't think it's. I'm trying to think how would it help show Christianity is true and show evidence to show Christianity is true, and I'm not finding a good justification for that because I believe Christianity is true. I believe the evidence confirms it, and that's what I want my channel to be about. I don't know if getting involved in that is really going to help the mission of this channel in that way. So probably not. The more I think about it, for sure. Just learned young Earth creationists consider Walton a liberal scholar.
Well, anybody who disagrees with them is a liberal scholar. So
who, depending on who you talk to, I'm either a liberal atheist or I'm a fundamentalist Christian, because the anti-theists say I'm a fundamentalist nut job, and then the young Earth creationists, flat earthers, King James onlyists say I'm a liberal atheist. I've been called an actual. And Muslims say I'm also a liberal atheist too. That's my favorite. Like they'll say I'm a liberal atheist because I don't believe in child marriage, because he must be a liberal atheist because he thinks child marriage is wrong. You see,
this is the proof. Oh, why do they? Yeah, I just child marriage. I feel like that ought to just end it right there. That's just like, you think the discussion would stop?
No, I want them to keep talking about child marriage. I want everyone to see them talking about child marriage. I want everyone to see that you should become Muslim because our prophet, he had sex with a 9-year-old. You see, this is the proof.
It's legal in Iraq now.
Oh yeah, yeah. Good for them. They're doing so well over there. With
good job, Iraq.
Yo,
bring Saddam back.
Hold on. Let me get this book here. This is a great book. I've read one of the earlier editions, and I got this 3rd edition because I was gonna go through it again. He shows that like Islam like used science as long as it like forward Islam, and when they figured out everything they could use from science to help Islam, they then stopped science altogether in the Islamic world. And so he's showing that like the reason science came out of the Christian Europe is because we had a separation of church and state. We allowed for it to develop into its own institution. It wasn't just for benefiting the religion, it was for benefiting humanity. Whereas in Islam, it did help science in some ways, but then it hindered it greatly because they only allowed science to be subject to Islam. And when they used it as much as they could to help Islam, like you develop trigonometry, so you know which way to pray towards Mecca, that kind of stuff. When they used it as much as they could, they discarded it. They threw it out because it was no longer useful. And so by the 1500s, Europe is advancing, and there's very few doctors, by the 1800s, Europe is taken over, and like Islam is still stuck in like the 13th century.
Yeah.
How is Lydia doing? Praying for her.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he's referring to McGrew.
right.
We know each other. And so, just keep praying for her. She does have like a neurological condition that was triggered by something, and won't get into all what it was, but actually, she's pretty outspoken about it. But you can just, if you search enough on YouTube, you can find it. But at any rate, please continue to pray for her. She has good days. She has bad days. She's still in a lot of pain in a lot of different ways. And but she has good days. And so pray that the doctors know what to do, how to treat her. And if there's some sort of way to get her healthy and better and pain-free again, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, so Eric, are you now convinced that Jesus was a real person, but everything about him we know is a myth?
I'm ready to take the Mythvision Shahada right now. Yeah, let's. There is no God, and there is no God, and I don't know. Derek Lambert is
his prophet.
The prophet. He is the prophet. He said he was a prophet. Remember? So, yeah. But no, Derek's I still like the guy. Personally, but yeah,
he's a great guy. But dude, you got to stop the psychoanalyzing for the same reason you hate it when it's done to you.
Please.
Like it's not. This is when you do that. You're just preaching to the choir. Anyone who is not on your side just digs their heels in because they feel like they're being attacked.
I'll say this. I'll say one thing, and he can take this however he wants it. I've literally had agnostic people or non-believing people reach out to me and say, I used to like his channel better when he would talk to like Paula Friedrichsen or Bart Ehrman or like these different scholars that weren't like these hardcore mimesis. Everything is pagan parallels. The Jews never had an original idea in their entire life. They said that they enjoyed his channel better. Now, maybe he's grown a different audience with that. So he can take it for whatever it's worth. But I think these ideas are just, if you're going to argue against Christianity, like I said earlier, I just don't think this is the best way to go.
No, and like even if I deconverted from Christianity, the last thing that would deconvert me is the Dennis McDonald mimesis crap. Like,
right.
I mean, like that's just not going to convince me regardless. I mean, I know the arguments that I find the best, and they're low on the totem pole. I feel like if you really want to deconvert Christians, there are much better ways to go about it.
There are better scholars. There have some philosophers on your channel. Have some atheist philosophers.
Philosophical arguments I consider to be the cream of the crop, not this.
Yeah. Have Oppie on, have Evan Fales on, have some of these other guys on. I don't know.
Do a video on Mind Shift's new video on God's character. I would have to take a look. It's not in front of me now. Maybe Than and I can look at that later. So, but yeah, I again, as I said, if I was going to deconvert, there's like a 0.01% chance this would be it that would get me.
Yeah, have people that argue more against the historicity side of it, which he does. And again, I have problems with a lot of their arguments too. But to me, those are more fun and interesting discussions to be had between like the quote unquote conservative believing side versus the non-believing side. This stuff to me is just so weird and out there and fringy. And maybe he thinks my views are fringy too, whatever. That's his deal. But yeah, it's just, if you're passionate about spreading atheism, this is not the way I'd go.
Well, he admitted that like even our views are less fringe than his in the beginning of this video. So
yeah,
at least we got that going for us. Would it be blasphemous for Christians to believe revelations that aren't part of the Bible?
Like the book of Revelation?
No. He means like, let's say like, you're a Seventh-day Adventist and you believe in the revelations to Ellen G. White, perhaps something like that. I don't know if it'd be blasphemous, but I would be like, I would never put it on par with Scripture. Never. Never.
Nothing's going to be on par with Scripture.
And I'd be super, super skeptical of that stuff. I don't. And here's what I've often said:
it's to line up with the Bible. If there is somebody who had some kind of revelation,
if it goes against the Bible, then it's heresy. If it aligns with the Bible, it's not necessary. Okay. So what's the point of it?
he just clarified the book of Revelation, like you would reject it. I mean, no, I don't think necessarily rejecting it would make you blasphemous.
Oh, I completely misunderstood this comment.
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay.
I think you'd be going against the consensus of the church, which would be an unwise thing to do.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't think that would by itself make you a blasphemer or out of the faith.
Yeah, I mean,
It does kind of say. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think you're bordering on it for sure.
You're in dangerous territory. You're trending in some wrong path if that's what you're entertaining.
Listen, the tradition is important, and the building up of the canon among the church fathers is important as well. So I think
absolutely,
I wouldn't do that. I would say you're probably, if not blasphemous, on the border of it. And so you're either one or the other, and that's not good. So
yeah,
that's what I'd say. So, all right, I got Eric's tired. I should let him go to sleep. He looks exhausted.
I'm an old man, and my wife is messaging me saying the kids are going to go to bed. You gotta give them say goodnight. So
the really blasphemous is saying Revelations with an S at the end. Yeah, it's Revelation, not Revelations. Good point.
My pastor tells a story that he actually, when he went to Bible school, it wasn't like a fancy seminary or anything, that he actually was docked a letter grade down because when he turned in a report, he said Book of Revelations, and the professor was like, nah, don't do that.
Yeah, I try not to be that petty. I know I say it all the time. I'll say Revelations and just it rolls off the tongue. It's hard not to sometimes because you just think of that. Revelations, plural. So, All right, everyone, thanks for coming. I should be live on my channel again next Monday. I might respond to a genetically modified skeptic video because I've wanted to do that for a little while, but we'll see. So anything you got coming up on your channel you want to promote?
I am at a place where I need to pray for some ideas because I think I need to. I'm studying Jehovah's Witnesses more, which is weird. For some reason, I'm getting into cults. So I might do a few of those, or I might do some Christmas videos. I'm not really sure. Just videos defending the birth narratives and different things like that against skeptical charges, because that comes around this year a lot, as well as other problems that people have with the Christmas kind of stuff in general, which ties into Jehovah's Witnesses, since they, that's, if you celebrate Christmas, that's pagan. But I think this guy right here has covered that territory probably well enough. So maybe I'll skip that. I don't know.
Yeah. So wait, I just got here. Keep going. No, we're closing out.
No, bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, Yeshua.
Come back next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be streaming, I promise. So every Monday at that time. I'll see you guys then. If I don't feel the need to stream, maybe Wednesday, but I'm not sure because it's Thanksgiving weekend. So I'm going to try to keep it cool. So, all right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Stay gangster, everyone.